Welcome to yet another Friday session. This one will be a little bit different. We're going to be exploring Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance. Fascinating book in many ways. Among other things, Ron Howard directed a Netflix film about it that starred Amy Adams and Glenn Close. I will confess to not having seen it, but I will also confess to planning on viewing that in the not too distant future. And it says in the title, Hillbilly Elegy, a memoir of a family and culture in crisis. This was a very popular book not too long ago, and it discussed a lot of things that happened when a family from Kentucky moved into Ohio in what they call the Rust Belt, and in many ways how that reflects a change within our culture, within our politics. Now, lest anybody wonder why on earth I'm going to be reading with a somewhat southern dialect, I'm going to jumpstart toward the end of the book. J.D. Vance graduated from Yale Law School, but there's one sentence that I can't resist sharing with you that'll pretty much explain why I've made this choice. And it says, now that's not exactly a bad thing. For much of that first year in law school, I reveled in the fact that I was the only big Marine with a Southern twang at my elite law school. So you see, there's a reason for my choice. And now to delve into the family, we're going to just hopscotch through the book. Now, Mama is his grandmother, Papa is his grandfather, and they were from Kentucky. And it starts, despite her admonition not to start fights, our unspoken honor code made it easy to convince someone else to start a fight for you. If you really wanted to get into it with someone, all you needed to do was insult his mom. No amount of self-control could withstand a well-placed maternal criticism. Your mom's such a hillbilly that her false teeth have cavities. Or a simple, yo mama. Now these were fighting words, whether you wanted them to be or not. To shirk from avenging a string of insults was to lose your honor, your dignity, or even your friends. It was to go home and be afraid to tell your family that you had disgraced them. I don't know why, but after a few years, Mama's views evolved on fighting. I was in third grade, had just lost a race, and felt there was only one way to adequately deal with the taunting victor. Mama, lurking nearby, intervened in what was certain to be another schoolyard cage match. She sternly asked whether I had forgotten her lesson that the only just fights are defensive. I didn't know what to say. She had endorsed the unstated rule of honor of fighting only just a few years earlier. One time I got into a fight and you told me that I did good. I told her. She said, well then, I was wrong. You shouldn't fight unless you have to. Now, that made an impression. Mama never admitted mistakes. The next year, I noticed that a class bully had taken a particular interest in a specific victim, an odd kid I rarely spoke to. Thanks to my prior exploits, I was largely immune to bullying, and like most kids, was usually content to avoid the bully's attention. One day, though, he said something about his victim that I overheard, and I felt a strong urge to stick up for the poor kid. There's something pathetic about the target, who seemed especially wounded by the bully's treatment. When I spoke to Memoir after school that day, I broke down in tears. I felt incredibly guilty that I hadn't had the courage to speak up for this poor kid. I just sat there, listened to someone else make his life a living hell. She asked whether I had spoken to the teacher about it, and I assured her that I had. That bitch ought to be put in jail for sitting there not doing anything. And then she said something that I will never forget. Sometimes, honey, you have to fight, even when you're not defending yourself. Sometimes it's just the right thing to do. Now, tomorrow, you need to stand up for that boy. And if you have to stand up for yourself, then do that too. Then she taught me a move, a swift, hard, you make sure to turn your hips, punch to the right of the gut. If he starts in on you, make sure to punch him right in the belly button. Now, the next day at school, I felt nervous and hoped the bully would take a day off. But in the predictable chaos as the class lined up for lunch, the bully, his name was Chris, asked my little charge whether he planned on crying that day. "Shut up," I said. "Just leave him alone." Chris approached me, pushed me, and asked what I planned to do about it. I walked right up to him, pivoted my right hip, and sucker punched him right in the stomach. He immediately and terrifiedly dropped to his knees, seemingly unable to breathe. By the time I realized that I'd really injured him, he was alternately coughing and trying to catch his breath. He even spit up a small amount of blood. Now, Chris went on to the school nurse, and after I confirmed that I hadn't killed him and would avoid the police, my thoughts immediately turned to the school justice system, whether I'd be suspended or expelled, and for how long. While the other kids played at recess and Chris recovered with the nurse, teacher brought me into the classroom. Whew. I thought she was going to tell me that she'd called my parents and I'd be kicked out of school. Instead, she gave me a lecture about fighting, made me practice my handwriting instead of playing outside. I detected a hint of approval from that teacher, and I sometimes wonder where there were school politics at work in her inability to appropriately discipline the class bully. At any rate, Memoir found out about the fight directly from me. Praised me for doing something really good. It was the last time I ever got in a fist fight. That's a little bit of that hillbilly perspective. Mama, from another place in the book, often told a parable. A young man was sitting at home when a terrible rainstorm began. Within hours, the man's house began to flood. Someone came to his door, offering a ride to higher ground. The man declined, saying, "God will take care of me." A few hours later, as the waters engulfed the first floor of the man's home, a boat passed by. Captain offered to take him to safety. The man declined, saying, "God will take care of me. Few hours after that, as the man waited on his roof, his entire home flooded. Helicopter flew by, and the pilot offered transportation to dry land. Again the man declined, telling the pilot that God would care for him. Soon thereafter, the waters overcame the man, and as he stood before God in heaven, he protested his fate. You promised that you'd help me so long as I was faithful. But God replied, I sent you a car, a boat, and a helicopter. Your death is your own fault. God helps those what helps themselves. This was the wisdom of the book of Memoir. The fallen world described by the Christian religion matched the world I saw around me. One where a happy car ride could quickly turn to misery. One where individual misconduct rippled across a family's and a community's life. When I asked Mama if God loved us, I asked her to reassure me that this religion of ours could still make sense of the world we lived in. Oh, I needed reassurance of some deeper justice, some cadence or rhythm that lurked beneath the heartache and chaos. And now I'm going to fast forward a bit. And as I told you, he and his family were originally from Kentucky. Cut off for the first time, this is going to school, from home and family, I learned a lot about myself and my culture. Contrary to conventional wisdom, the military is not a landing spot for low-income kids with no other options. And I didn't tell this to you straight. It was when he went into the Marines. It wasn't when he went into school. The 69 members of my boot camp platoon included black, white, and Hispanic kids, rich kids from upstate New York, poor kids from West Virginia, Catholics, Jews, Protestants, and even a few atheists. And I was naturally drawn to those like me. The person I talked to most, I wrote to my family in my first letter home, is from Leslie County, Kentucky. He talks like he's from Jackson. And I was telling him how much bullshit it was that Catholics got all the free time they did. Well, they get it because of the way the church schedule works. He is definitely a country kid because he said, "What's a Catholic?" And I told him it was just another form of Christianity, and he said, "Oh, I might have to try that out." Now, Mama understood precisely where it came from. Now, down in that part of Kentucky, everybody's a snake handler, she wrote back, only partially joking. During my time away, Mama showed vulnerability that I'd never seen before. Whenever she received a letter from me, she would call my aunt a sister, demanding that someone come to her house immediately and interpret my chicken scratch. I love you a big bunch, and I miss you a bunch. I forget you out here. I think you'll come down the stairs, and I can holler at you. It's just a feeling you aren't really gone. My hands hurt today. Well, that arthritis, I guess. I'll go for now and write more later. Love you, please. Take care. Mama's letters never contained the necessary punctuation and always included some articles, usually from the Reader's Digest, to occupy my time. And we go on further. On my first day home from boot camp, I walked into the barber shop of my grandfather's old friends. Anyway, Marines have to keep the hair short, and I didn't want to slack just 'cause no one was watching. Now, for the first time, the corner barber, a dying breed, even though I didn't know it at the time, greeted me as an adult. I sat in his chair, told some dirty jokes, most of which I'd learned only a few weeks earlier, and shared some boot camp stories. When he was about my age, he was drafted into the Army to fight in Korea. So we traded some bobs about the Army and the Marines. After the haircut, he refused to take my money, told me, stay safe. He'd cut my hair before, and I'd walked by his shop nearly every day for 18 years. Yet this was the first time he'd ever shaken my hand and treated me as an equal. And on we go. I don't believe in epiphanies. I don't believe in transformative moments, as transformation is harder than a moment. Well, I've seen far too many people awash in genuine desire to change only lose their mettle when they realize just how difficult change actually is. But that moment, that boy was pretty close for me. For my entire life, I'd harbored resentment to the world. Oh, I was mad at my mother and father. Mad that I rode the bus to school while other kids caught rides with friends. Mad that my clothes didn't come from Abercrombie. Mad that my grandfather died. Mad that we lived in a small house. That resentment didn't vanish in an instant. But I stirred and surveyed the mass of children of a war-torn nation, their school without running water, and the overjoyed boy. I began to appreciate how lucky I was. Born in the greatest country on earth, every modern convenience at my fingertips, supported by two loving hillbillies, and part of a family that, for all its quirks, loved me unconditionally. That moment, I resolved to be the type of man who would smile when someone gave him an eraser. I haven't quite made it there, but without that day in Iraq, I wouldn't be trying. The other life-altering component of my Marine Corps experience was constant. From the first day, that scary drill instructor and a piece of cake, until the last, when I grabbed my discharge papers and sped home. The Marine Corps taught me how to live like an adult. I've got to flip through some pages here. Now, we're finally back at law school, which he went to after he went to the Marines. Here's the exhausted list of things I didn't know when I got to Yale Law School. That you needed to wear a suit to a job interview. 2, that wearing a suit large enough to fit a silverback gorilla was inappropriate. 3, that a butter knife wasn't just decorative. After all, anything that requires a butter knife can be done better with a spoon or an index finger. Again, that pleather and leather were 2 different substances. That your shoes and your belt should match. That certain cities and states had better job prospects. That going to a nicer college brought better benefits outside of bragging rights. And that finance was an industry that people worked in. Mamma always resented the hillbilly stereotype. The idea that our people were a bunch of slobbering morons. But the fact is that I was remarkably ignorant of how to get ahead. Not knowing things that many others do often has serious economic consequences. It cost me a job in college. Apparently Marine Corps combat boots and khaki pants aren't proper interview attire. Could have cost me a lot more in law school if I hadn't had a few people helping me every step of the way. Now, my cousin Gail is one of my all-time favorite people. She's one of the first of my mom's generation, the Blanton grandchildren. Gail's life is the American dream personified. Ah, a beautiful house, 3 great kids, happy marriage, and a saintly demeanor. Now, outside Mama Blanton, a virtual deity in the eyes of us grandkids and great-grandkids, I've never heard anyone else called the nicest person in the world. For Gail, it is an entirely deserved title. I assume that Gail had inherited her storybook life from her parents. No one's that nice, I thought, especially not someone who suffered any real adversity. But Gail was a Blanton, and at heart, a hillbilly. I should have known that no hillbilly makes it to adulthood without a few major screw-ups along the way. Gail's home life provided its own emotional baggage. She was 7 when her dad walked out, and 17 when she graduated from high school, planning for college at Miami University. But there was a catch. Mom told me I couldn't go to college unless I broke up with my boyfriend. So I moved out the day after graduation, and by August, I was pregnant. Almost immediately, her life began to disintegrate. Racial prejudice bubbled up to the surface when she announced that a black baby was joining the family. Announcements led to arguments. And then, one day, Gail found herself without a family. I didn't hear from any of our relatives, Gail told me. My mom told me she never wanted to hear my name again. Given her age and lack of family support, it's hardly surprising that her marriage soon ended. But Gail's life had grown considerably more complex. She hadn't just lost a family. She gained a young daughter who depended entirely on her. It completely changed my life. Being a mom was my identity. Oh, I might have been a hippie, Now I had rules. No drugs, no alcohol, nothing that was going to lead to social services taking my baby away. That's a side view of one of the family's lives that you'll have to read the book to get the conclusion. But you already know it's a happy one. Life sometimes does work out. In his afterword to the book, which follows his trajectory from youth, through school, through the Marines, through Yale, through life up to this point, he ruminates. Many people, especially those who knew me well, have asked me to describe my life since Hillbilly Elegy was published about 2 years ago. I find the question extremely difficult to answer. Now, since the book came out, I've traveled to places I never expected to go, spoken to thousands of strangers about my life story, met with a couple of former presidents, appeared on national TV, and most important, had a baby. Well, my wife did the hard part. I just watched. How do you possibly summarize all these experiences in a brief conversation? As a person who partially makes his living with the written and spoken word, I'm always a little disappointed at the answer that always comes to my mind. But I offer it anyway. Well, it's been pretty damn weird. When I decided to write Hillbilly Elegy, I wanted to answer 2 questions that had bothered me since my first days as a student at Yale Law School. Why does this elite institution seem so culturally foreign? And relatedly, why are so few kids who grow up the way I did, disadvantaged, to use the vocabulary of the day, making it to our society's elite institutions? The book I wrote is an effort to answer that question in incredibly personal ways. And as I often tell people, I was initially uncomfortable with that. Indeed, even the process of finding endorsers, part of which forced me to send the book to strangers, made me want to gag. But I wrote the book the way I did because I thought it would make my argument more compelling. That if people experienced these problems through the perspectives of real people, they might appreciate their complexity. Hillbilly Elegy's reception makes me think this was a wise decision. Interestingly, many of the family members I interviewed had an analogous reaction. I was pretty open with you, one of them explained, because I didn't think anyone would read it. Who'd want to hear our family story? Judging by the largely positive reception, turns out that many people did. And in conclusion, he ends with, there's a plot of land in Jackson, Kentucky, not far from where Mama grew up, that has been in our family for around 100 years. Oh, maybe longer. Mama and many of her siblings were born there. Both Mama and Papa are buried there now. Joke with Usha that someday we'll be buried there too. But at least for me, It's not a joke. The irony of the book's success is that it gave me the means to buy that piece of land. Oh, something I wanted to do for much of my life. I bought it, most of all, because I want Mama and Papa's graves to be maintained for our family for generations to come. But I also bought it because I wanted a reason to take my own son back to the place that formed such a large piece of my childhood. I want Ewan to explore those hills, search for crawdads in them creeks, and feel at home there, like I did. And here's for you to feel at home where you are. Find your bliss, folks. Till we meet again on next Friday with a completely different subject. Oh my, it's going to be exciting. And you aren't going to believe it. But you'll just have to come and see and hear. Till then, have a wonderful weekend. Talk to y'all later.